Picture England in the year 1066. William of Normandy has landed on the southern coast. His army is intact. The Anglo-Saxon forces are divided. Victory should be inevitable. But before William marches toward Hastings, he stops, not to pray, not to scout enemy positions, but to dig. According to a fragment preserved in later Icelandic saga tradition, William orders his men to locate an unmarked burial mound overlooking the sea. There is no marker, no name, only a rumor. The soldiers dig until they reach a decayed body, bones nearly 2 centuries old. William orders the remains burned, not out of ritual, out of fear. The belief was simple and absolute, as long as those bones remained in English soil. No foreign ruler could ever truly conquer the island. The corpse belonged to a Viking warlord so feared that even in death, he was considered a weapon. That man was Ivar the Boneless. This story may sound like superstition, but superstition does not survive 200 years, unless it is rooted in something real. William did not fear legends. He feared precedent. He feared history. Ivar was not remembered as a hero. He was remembered as a force that broke systems. He dismantled kingdoms, erased kings, and rewrote the political map of Britain. He did it without standing in battle like other warlords. He did it without leading charges. He did it from a position that should have made him powerless. And that is the first contradiction at the center of his story. To understand why England still feared him centuries after his death, we must return to the moment he should not have survived at all. The sagas place Ivar's birth in the early 9th century, on a wedding night already marked by warning. Ragnar Lothbrok was a warrior defined by ambition and appetite. His wife, Aslaug, was described not as a fighter, but as a seer. According to saga tradition, she warned Ragnar to wait 3 nights before consummating their marriage. If he did not, the child conceived would be cursed, born without the strength required to live as a man. Ragnar ignored her. 9 months later, the prophecy arrived. The child's legs were twisted. His body lacked structural strength. Where bone should have been firm, there was weakness. In Viking society, this was not tragic. It was procedural. Children born unable to walk, fight, or work were exposed, left to the elements and to die. This was not cruelty by their standards. It was survival logic. A Viking who could not fight could not eat. A Viking who could not eat would die anyway. Yet Ivar was spared. The sagas never explain why. They do not describe a miracle. They do not describe mercy. They only tell us that the child lived. Against custom, against logic, against the culture that produced him, that single decision created a problem Viking society could not solve. A man who could not function physically but could not be removed. The consequences of that decision would echo across Britain. Modern medicine offers explanations for what the sagas describe. The most widely accepted theory is osteogenesis imperfecta, a genetic condition that weakens bone structure, causing fractures and deformities, and chronic pain. Another possibility is Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which results in extreme joint instability and abnormal flexibility. Either condition would have made movement dangerous. Both would have caused constant pain. This context matters. Ivar did not grow up merely disadvantaged. He grew up in continuous physical distress, in a society that defined worth through bodily capability. Every comparison with his brothers reinforced his exclusion. But pain does not only limit action, it reshapes psychology. Historical patterns show prolonged physical suffering reduces empathy and increases fixation on control. Ivar could not compete physically, so he abandoned that arena entirely. Instead, he focused on influence. If he could not command through strength, he would command through fear. If he could not stand among warriors, he would position himself above them. By necessity, Ivar began transforming weakness into leverage. Ivar did not grow up alone. He was raised among Ragnar Lothbrok's sons, men who represented the highest ideals of Viking masculinity. Bjorn Ironside, known for physical dominance and fearlessness. Ube, a berserker who favored direct violence. Halfdan and Sigurd, warriors shaped for command. By every cultural standard, Ivar should have been irrelevant. He was not. The sagas describe a dynamic that defies expectation. His brothers deferred to him. This was not sentiment. It was not pity. It was recognition. Viking leadership was not determined solely by physical strength. While brute force mattered, the Norse valued cunning, the ability to predict, deceive, and manipulate outcomes. Strategy was respected because it preserved lives and multiplied victories. Ivar understood this early. While his brothers trained for battle, Ivar trained for control. He studied games of strategy such as Nefatafel, learning how to sacrifice pieces to capture kings. He learned that warriors were tools, not equals. He positioned himself not as a fighter, but as the mind, behind the fighters. Bjorn provided force. Ubi provided intimidation. Ivar provided direction. This arrangement was not benevolent, it was functional. Ivar did not inspire loyalty through affection. He inspired obedience through certainty. He always knew what came next. In a society built on chaos, predictability was power. Historical sources suggest that Ivar compensated for his immobility in two ways. First, through upper body strength and weapons not requiring footwork, particularly the bow. Second, and far more effectively, through psychological domination. Ivar learned early that fear was more reliable than respect. Chronic pain changes behavior. It narrows emotional range and redirects frustration outward. For Ivar, suffering became justification. If his body was condemned to agony, others would share that condition. The sagas describe him as calculating rather than explosive. He did not enter berserker rages. He spoke calmly. He waited. He watched. He manipulated allies and enemies alike. He exaggerated threats. He cultivated reputation. He understood violence did not need to be constant. It needed to be memorable. This period shaped the reputation that would later terrify England. Ivar was not feared because he killed indiscriminately. He was feared because his violence followed logic. Men could understand him. They could predict him, and they knew they could not escape him. The turning point came with Ragnar Lothbrok's death. According to saga tradition, Ragnar was captured by King Ella of Northumbria and executed by being thrown into a pit of venomous snakes. The method mattered. It was not only death, it was humiliation. As Ragnar died, he reportedly spoke a final prophecy, that his sons would avenge him. When the news reached Ragnar's sons, their reactions diverged. Bjorn raged. Ube prepared for immediate retaliation. Ivar did neither. He went silent. Where his brothers saw revenge, Ivar saw opportunity. He understood that isolated raids would achieve nothing. Killing Ella alone would not correct the imbalance of power. Instead, Ivar proposed escalation. Not a raid, not punishment, a campaign. He argued that Ragnar's death justified total war. The objective was no longer vengeance. It was dismantlement. Northumbria would not be punished. It would be erased. This marked Ivar's transformation. He was no longer a raider. He became a strategist. Messengers were sent across Scandinavia. From Denmark to Norway to Sweden, warriors were summoned. Ivar promised wealth, land, and permanence. He was not recruiting fighters. He was assembling an invasion force. The Great Heathen Army was not born from rage. It was constructed through calculation, and Ivar the Boneless was its architect. By 865, the strategy was complete. The Great Heathen Army assembled not as a raiding force, but as a coalition. Hundreds of ships, thousands of men. Warriors drawn from Denmark, Norway, and the Swedish coast. This was unprecedented. For decades, the Anglo-Saxons had faced Viking raids following a pattern. Arrive in summer, loot quickly, leave before winter. These attacks were violent but predictable. Ivar changed the pattern. He understood the weakness of a large army. Logistics, food, shelter, mobility. An invasion force that could not move would starve. One that could not resupply would collapse. So Ivar did not sail directly to Northumbria. He landed in East Anglia. The move was deliberate. East Anglia was wealthy, lightly defended, and politically cautious. When King Edmund saw the fleet darken the horizon, he expected destruction. Instead, Ivar negotiated. He did not demand gold. He demanded horses. This was the decisive innovation. Vikings were sailors and infantry. Ivar turned them into cavalry. Mounted troops allowed the army to move faster than warning could spread. Edmund agreed, believing submission would purchase peace. He was wrong. Ivar wintered in East Anglia. His army rested, trained, and learned to ride using English resources. One kingdom was funding the destruction of another. When the army moved again, it did not sail. It rode north. Northumbria was already weakened. A civil war divided the kingdom between King Ella and Osbert, the deposed Osbert. Ivar knew this. Viking intelligence networks tracked political instability carefully as military strength. In late 1866, the army advanced. Its target was York, the ancient Roman capital of the north. A symbolic city. A fortified city. A city whose fall would signal permanence. Ivar timed the assault precisely. The army arrived on All Saints' Day. The city's leadership was distracted. Guards were unprepared. Religious observance replaced vigilance. The Vikings stormed the city with minimal resistance. York fell quickly. Ella and Osbert abandoned their rivalry and united to retake the city. This was the response Ivar expected. He did not retreat. He waited. York's Roman walls became a trap. When the Northumbrian force attacked, the battle turned close-quarters slaughter. The Vikings fought from prepared positions. The English forces broke. Osbert was killed. Ella survived. For Ivar, the campaign objective had been achieved. York was not the end. Ella was. What happened to King Ella remains one of history's most contested episodes in Viking history. The sagas claim that Ivar ordered the Blood Eagle, a ritual execution in which the victim's ribs were cut from the spine, opened outward, and the lungs pulled through the wounds. If taken literally, it would be among the most extreme acts of violence ever recorded. Modern scholars dispute this account. Linguistic analysis suggests the description may be metaphorical. Poetic language describing a corpse left for carrion birds. Medical arguments question whether a victim could survive long enough for the ritual to occur as described. But the historical effect is not disputed. The rumor spread. Ella's death was not remembered as execution. It was remembered as transformation. King reduced to symbol. Fear followed faster than armies. Whether the Blood Eagle was real, exaggerated, or symbolic, it served its purpose. Resistance collapsed. Northumbria ceased to function as an independent power. Ivar did not need to repeat the act. The idea of it was sufficient. Violence, once witnessed, did not need to be repeated. It only needed to be believed. With Northumbria broken, Ivar turned south. This time, the objective was not revenge. It was demonstration. The target was East Anglia, the same kingdom that had supplied him with horses years earlier. King Edmund believed he had purchased peace. Ivar viewed the transaction differently. The horses were not a bargain. They were a down payment. In 1869, the Great Heathen Army rode into East Anglia. Monasteries were burned. Settlements collapsed. Edmund raised a force, but his army was composed of farmers and levies. Ivar's men were veterans hardened by years of warfare. Continuous warfare. The battle was brief. Edmund was captured. According to Christian chroniclers, Ivar offered him a choice: submit to Viking rule, renounce his faith, and live, or refuse and die. Edmund refused. Ivar ordered a staged execution. Edmund was bound to a tree. Archers were instructed not to kill him quickly. Arrows were fired into non-vital areas deliberately. The body was pierced repeatedly while Edmund continued to pray. Only after the spectacle ended was Edmund beheaded. This was not personal vengeance. It was political terror. Ivar was not punishing resistance. He was destroying the idea that faith protected kings. Edmund became a martyr. Ivar became something else, a kingmaker. After East Anglia, Ivar disappeared from English records. He did not retreat. He relocated. Across the Irish Sea, the annals of Ireland record a warlord named Itmar. Modern consensus identifies him as Ivar the Boneless. Ireland offered something England could not: permanence through profit. Dublin was not yet a stone city. It was a fortified trading hub built around a black tidal pool. It was also the largest slave market in Western Europe. Ivar understood the economics of war. An army required silver. Silver required trade. Trade required human cargo. Ivar allied with Olaf the White and established a dual kingship. Raids expanded into systematic campaigns, designed to capture populations, not just plunder them. War had evolved. Violence became infrastructure. In 1870, Ivar and Olaf targeted Dumbarton Rock in Strathclyde. The fortress was considered impregnable. A volcanic formation rising directly from the river, defended by steep cliffs and centuries of failed assaults. Ivar did not attack it. He besieged it. He identified the fortress's weakness, its water supply. Over 4 months, the defenders were cut off. No assaults, no heroics, only containment. Thirst defeated stone. When Dumbarton surrendered, the scale of victory was unprecedented. In 1871, Ivar and Olaf returned to Dublin with a fleet of approximately 200 ships. They carried livestock, treasure, and thousands of captives. The population of an entire kingdom had been liquidated. At this point, Ivar controlled the Irish Sea. He had broken Northumbria and executed 2 kings, turned Dublin into a slave capital, demonstrated even strongest defenses could be neutralized without battle. He had reached the apex of power. What followed was not defeat by enemy. It was defeat by biology. At the height of his power, Ivar disappeared again, this time not by choice. The Irish annals record his death in 873. The entry is brief and unemotional. Itmar, king of the Norsemen of all Ireland and Britain, died of a sudden and hideous disease. No battle, no execution, no defeat by enemy. The body that had defined Ivar's entire life finally collapsed. If he suffered from osteogenesis imperfecta, the cause is consistent. Severe forms often result in respiratory failure or cardiac collapse. As the ribcage deforms and restricts the lungs, a lifetime of pain ends not in spectacle, but failure. In systemic failure. For a man who had broken kingdoms, the ending was private. Ivar died as he had lived, trapped inside his own body. Where Ivar was buried remains unresolved. The annals place his death in Dublin. The sagas claim he requested burial in England, believing his presence would curse invaders after death. In the 1980s, archaeologists excavating a site in Repton, Derbyshire, uncovered a mass grave. The remains of more than 200 Viking warriors were found, arranged around a central burial. Grave 511. The man in grave 511 was buried with a sword, a Thor's hammer amulet, and a boar's tusk placed between legs. The boar symbolized fertility and power, an unusual detail. The skeleton belonged to a tall, robust man. He had suffered fatal wounds to skull and femoral artery. He did not resemble the physically fragile figure in sagas. This created contradiction. Some historians argue that boneless was never literal, perhaps a mistranslation or ironic nickname. Others argue the disability was real and later exaggerated. While the man in the grave may have been lieutenant, there is no consensus. What remains clear is that the burial marked a focal point. These men had chosen to die and be buried together, whether Ivar lay among them or not. The structure reflects centralized loyalty. When he died, something ended. With Ivar gone, the Great Heathen Army fractured. The force that had operated as a unified machine split along leadership lines. One faction, led by Halfdan, moved north. But this was not a campaign of destruction. Halfdan distributed land. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records that Viking warriors began farming, marrying locally, and settling. Raiders became landholders. The invasion transitioned into occupation. The other faction, led by Guthrum, continued south. Their target was Wessex, the last intact Anglo-Saxon kingdom. This division mattered. Ivar had been the gravitational center. He unified ambition, violence, and logistics into a single operational system. Without him, cohesion failed. What followed was not immediate victory for England, but it created space. And into that space stepped a king, who would learn from everything Ivar had done. The final phase of the story does not begin with Ivar. It begins with what he left behind. After the Great Heathen Army fractured, Guthrum advanced into Wessex, the last Anglo-Saxon kingdom not yet dismantled. His methods reflected Ivar's influence. Speed, surprise, timing. In January 1878, Guthrum launched a sudden winter attack on the royal court at Chippenham during a religious festival. The maneuver mirrored Ivar's seizure of York years earlier. King Alfred barely escaped. For months, Alfred lived in the Somerset marshes, isolated, outnumbered, displaced. By traditional standards, his resistance should have ended there. It did not. Alfred observed the enemy rather than reacting to him. He identified the core Viking advantage, mobility. Then he dismantled it. He reorganized the army so half remained in the field. while the rest farmed. Supply became continuous. Response became immediate. He built ships designed not to dominate the sea, but to deny it to Viking longships. Most importantly, he constructed a network of fortified towns, burhs placed so no settlement lay beyond rapid protection. The system eliminated undefended targets. In the spring of 1878, Alfred emerged from hiding. At Evington, his forces held the line. Guthrum was defeated and besieged. When surrender came, Alfred did not execute him. He converted him. Guthrum was baptized. Alfred stood as godfather. England was divided. The north and east became Danelaw. Wessex survived. Alfred had not invented these solutions. He had learned them from Ivar. Ivar the Boneless set out to destroy the Anglo-Saxon world. He succeeded. Northumbria collapsed. East Anglia was erased. Mercia was neutralized. The old system, the Heptarchy, could not survive him. But destruction created vacuum. By eliminating rival kingdoms, Ivar forced consolidation. He left Wessex as the only viable alternative. In doing so, he unintentionally enabled a unified English state. Without Ivar, there is no Alfred the Great. Without the Great Heathen Army, there is no Danelaw. Without the monster, there is no nation. Ivar never ruled England, but he shaped it. He proved physical strength was expendable, but fear was durable. That conquest did not require presence, only pressure. That a man who could not stand could force kings kneel. The nickname Boneless became the final irony, because while his body failed him, his will did not. And long after his bones turned to dust, the systems he broke and the ones he created remained.